My father was disgusted by poverty. There was not one homeless man he did not feel a mutual glee and nausea over. As a child growing up in Puerto Rico, poor in Puerto Rico, much like Mitch McConnell, his reaction to his condition was oddly unique. While most people try to find happiness with what they have or project and reshape their disdain for it into their surrounding environment, like their family, these two boys literally hated the poor, both seeing them as stepping stones to scam them amid suits for what they had. When I read my father's reviews as a lawyer, they all said the same thing that I could say about my childhood. He said he would show up, and somehow I ended up paying more. I remember visiting my father at his work and seeing the wads of cash he would stuff into his pockets. He probably never got robbed because he knew most of thieves, and they respected how he loved carrying wads of cash as if they were literally cashmere on his skin. While he had no problem committing fraud to keep his money, he had even less issues showing to the very people who he would never give it to, and technically paid him, the poor. For the most part, that was his clientele, and in perspective, his treatment of them was fascinating. He appeared like a god, ready and willing to give them the mercy that mankind had failed to display, yet he did not care for them beyond that wad of cash that gave him a greater high than any coke snort could. It was a dynamic he shared with my mother. My father loved to appear like a savior, and I think it was because he knew he was so destructive that people in crisis attracted him. They gave him not only the opportunity to judge, but also the opportunity to act like he was a man who always had his ish together, enough so to be there for him. His favorite crisis was my mother's bad health because he loved the feeling of being the hero to the very people he wished and had destroyed. Throughout my childhood, my mother was very sick. It is part of why I wonder if she allowed my father's abusiveness to eradicate our boundaries for our well-being, because in truth, she did not have it. Her health was fragile, and my father was an exhausting person. Even in his other-centeredness, he had the purpose of feeling, looking, and being praised as altruistic. Admittedly, he was there for most of her hospitalizations, even the ones that lasted for months. She was always grateful to his presence, and my father ate it up like a Girl Scout badge that proved he could behave and sell cookies. Yet when she was not knocking on death's door, he would kill her by returning his usual beggar self, a man that could only make money via how he manipulated people out of theirs. As my father started living a more luxurious life, he became disgusted that I did not match, forgetting that I was his underage child, and partially why I could not buy Salvatore Ferragamo shoes to mutually step on his soul is because unless I worked for Disney, 50-year-olds do not make that kind of money. Sometimes, which may sound reprehensible, the worst thing that happened to me and my dad was his sobriety. My entire life, he painted his sins with the excuse of his addictions, but when he became sober and clear-headed, he also became clearly malicious. He was righteous about his ability to no longer do drugs, believing that his morality eroded with every powdery ingestion. Yet his morality rode on how he treated those that helped him when he was poor. In the end, what he revealed is a disgust for his condition that did not inspire gratitude for those that stuck by him as much as disdain for when they fell into the same one. So my father hated poor people, and he had this weird thing when it came to homeless people. He either fought with them, because you know, there's always that mentally ill, crazy homeless guy that follows you and tells you to F off, especially in New York. Or the flip side, he would, give them a wad of cash and just revel in the feeling of the king, helping that one lucky peasant. My problem was my father was the peasant. My father had no moral compass. He was one of the most shameless human beings you would ever meet, just hurting people and getting away with it. And I was fascinated by his relationship with the poor, particularly his clientele, especially after I read his reviews, because I didn't know he was that poorly reviewed as a lawyer. I was like, did I get the wrong guy? And some of their reviews, I was like, well, damn, did I hire my father as a lawyer or a father? Because one of them hard to reach, which is funny because my father was always on the phone. Hard to reach. Kind of, once he thought you were going to lose, he checked out. But I remember going to visit my dad at work, And what's so crazy is my father always had wads of cash, thousands of dollars, which is why when he said he was broke, you would just look at the bulge on his pocket, and it wasn't, it was money. Um, and they would pay him in cash, and he didn't report. And he would just, the way he felt up that cash, the way his face lit up, it was like a rush. Like there's nobody that loved money like my dad. Nobody that loved material things. It's part of one of the things that I said that I felt, is this bad? My dad didn't realize he wasn't an addict because he did drugs. He was an addict because of his behaviors. The drugs were a manifestation and in turn manifested really poor behaviors, like the fact that he was very materialistic. He loved sex. He loved money. He loved drugs. He loved food. We'd go to restaurants. He couldn't order a plate. He had to order four. He loved excess. His personality was excessive. And I think growing up, as he would claim, in absolute poverty with a mother that just was not economically savvy, he hated poverty. And part of why he felt it was like he was a king wearing the wrong crown, wearing a paper crown when he should have been wearing a gold bedazzled one. And part of why I compared him to Mitch McConnell is that a lot of people don't know that Mitch McConnell was born into absolute poverty. And there's nobody that politically has done in American history more damage to the poor and more purposefully tried to destroy the poor than the man that came from them. And that was my dad, whether he was a lawyer or acting like, a husband and father to me and my mom. He had no respect or honor for where he came from, because he would hurt the very people that also came from it. And it was because I think sometimes, and it's something I mentioned in a prior episode, miraging with the producer lost all this weight and then became a bully to people that he deemed bigger, watching and monitoring, especially women, how they ate. And my dad did the same thing with women in terms of particularly poor women, judging them and taking their money and cutting them off from financial wealth and health off of this idea that they were just fools, dirty, poor fools. But yet they were the first women he called, his mother, my grandmother, my mom, me, when he felt poor. And that was my point with this episode of kind of, if you feel poor, sometimes you manifest or rather display that disgust for the poor. In essence, I materially judge the poor because I feel poor. And it gives me this righteousness and this rush that I can't find personally. Because like I mentioned with my mother, and I'm going to write to another episode, one about kind of for people who are children of addicts. I think that partially our disappointment when we might suffer, or a lot of us have suffered a great disappointment with our parents' sobriety because they still remained horrible. They were just clearer about it. My dad was still scheming, still scamming, still plotting against me and my mom and apparently his clientele. And getting those wads of cash from all of us, because, and he had told me, and maybe this is, and I mentioned it, he was a really smart man. He kind of said, I'm a bad person because I'm doing badly. I feel bad. I'm doing drugs. I lost my lawyer license. I regained it. Lost it, gained it. He painted all of his issues on his childhood trauma with his mother and his drug usage. And when he got the drug usage away and claimed that he was doing therapy and doing, which is why I talk about therapy in another episode too, and I think I mentioned it in Miraging, he said he'd gotten sober, which he was. You could tell he was sober. He had gotten ill, so that's part of why he became sober. He just didn't have the body anymore to keep on doing drugs. And he was starting to heal his childhood trauma. And I couldn't understand why he was still behaving badly, why he was still being malicious and verbally, financially, psychologically, emotionally abusive to me and my mom. But now he was in therapy. Now he was sober. And it kind of felt like, and I've said it before, it was like being told you're going to go to Disney World and you just ended up going to a park somewhere. Like it was this big moment in my entire life. Since he revealed to me he was on drugs when I was around 12. And he got sober right around the time I was 15. And I stayed by his side for a good few years after that, kind of still going through his sabotaging of me, still going through his abuse. Obviously, I was underage at the time. And I went through it because I was waiting for what he promised, which once I get sober, I'm going to take care of you in every way. I'm going to take care of your heart. I'm going to take care of you financially. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to take care of my words. I'm not going to call you stupid and fat in every corner. And he never got better. He never did that. He never stopped his harm. And when I say his sobriety was the worst thing for our relationship, is that not only did he become crueler, because now he had the mind to think up ways to hurt me and my mother, but I lost the veil. I really confirmed something that I always felt but dismissed because I was told that was bad, that my father was evil and that it wasn't drugs that were making him evil. It really was him. It was him. And when I would see him approach his clientele or approach the homeless and eventually me, the poor, it was 50-50. You either got a king who wanted to feel better about how he mistreated others by treating you well in an instant and wanting a parade for it because he loved the thing. Oh, thank you. You're such a good man. He loved the drama of gratitude, performative. Or you would get the man who, was cruel and would debase you for your condition because he had been in it and in his head he had gotten out of it. But he never did escape it because it was always there. It was always the underbelly of his misdeeds, of his misbehaviors. It was always the underbelly for why he could never connect with people unless he wore a mask. He couldn't make his children love him and his grandchildren unless he lied about and he invented some villain. His sisters, his mother, me, his ex. He always had to have a villain in his life. The drugs, the childhood trauma. I never met my dad. That's why I couldn't be a dad. There was always a villain. And the truth is, he was hateful. And he was smart enough to know he shouldn't be, but he wasn't good enough to actually heal that. So that's a new episode of Daddy Recovery. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Check out daddyrecovery.com. Check out Deandra on all platforms to revel in my music. And thank you so much for following me. I just want to add this point, actually, and something that I just thought of. I think what ultimately I'm trying to say with this episode is that my father judged me as pitiful without realizing that he left me in a pit. And he had trained me to love him unconditionally. And when we went through economic issues, we were never rich, but he was an addict and he was self-centered and he went through highs and lows. Apparently he left his other kids without electricity and he asked my mom for money. They were hungry and he asked my mom for money. And he forgot about all that when we went through our own issues. But part of why we struggled economically was because he didn't pay child support. Part of why and he would spend thousands of dollars in my face on himself. and he did it with purpose. So when he started looking at me like someone who couldn't get their life together, it was so unbelievably cruel and devastating to me and my heart, because here was somebody that did everything for me to fail and succeeded in many ways, always sabotaging my schooling, my well-being, my health, and looking at me like I was this sick, poor person that couldn't get out of the pit like he did. But he got out of the pit because he buried others. And that was what bothered me. And seeing his lawyer reviews and seeing my review of him as a dad, to judge the people you hurt as if you never hurt them is so Mitch McConnell of him. So that's my point.